Welcome to the 3026 Breakdown. I am John Lee, and today we have another fun-filled edition of How I Watched Fights. I'm really excited about today's How I Watch Fights because I got to sit down with my good buddy and a guy I really like a lot, MMA Kelton. So I'm super excited to be able to bring you some of the cool stuff we talked about, as he's a really good dude and a really good handicapper, and definitely someone you should follow. So let's get started. Kelton has been a hardcore MMA fan for 10 years and got into betting after hearing Luca Fury on, I believe, the Sherdog podcast. I didn't write down exactly what podcast, but he basically heard Luca Fury and felt like they were picking similar guys and had similar thought patterns for handicapping, so he kind of thought he could do that after hearing him on one of the podcasts, and that's when he got really serious about betting. Kelton has been betting seriously since UFC 195 and has had swings where he was up as much as 28 units. One of the things I thought was interesting is that Kelton does 2 rounds of tape study. He does the first round of tape study before he sets his own line, and then one afterwards to see if he would adjust the line, which is actually really interesting and something I might start doing as well. I set my own lines, but I do it the opposite way. I think of what percentage chance they have to win, and then I turn that into a line. So I actually might start doing 2 rounds of tape study because that seems kind of smart. Kelton watches fights on his laptop on mute, as do I and Dan Kelly, and rotates between fighters. That's something that both Kelton and I kind of came up with independently. He mentioned that, and that's something I've been doing. And I actually try to visualize one fighter like in the cage with the other fighter. It's kind of a weird thing I do, but I think it helps because I feel like when you watch 3 fights in a row of one fighter, you start thinking of, number one, I think you think that they're a little better than they are because you've just watched them and seen their tendencies, unless you see really bad stuff. But you kind of over-evaluate because you've seen them so much. Whereas if you watch one fighter and then you watch their opponent, you kind of get an idea of where the matchup would be because you're seeing them closer together in time. So I definitely recommend rotating between fighters when you're doing tape study for bets. Overall, Kelton looks for things like the sharper fighter, which is kind of who has the better technique, cardio, toughness, stuff like that, as well as looking for fighters' strengths and weaknesses and how they match up, things like clinch, takedown defense versus wrestling, stuff like that. Kelton tries to find lesser-known fighters and researches, smaller organizations like LFA. He just did a really cool feature on his YouTube page that you guys should check out called The Hardcore Fan's Delight, where he looks at, the lower tier organizations. And he also made a point of pointing out who are athletes but not necessarily fighters. I can't remember who his example was of an athlete who wasn't a fighter, but he gave Brian Barberena as an example of a guy who doesn't really look all that athletic. He's got kind of dad bod, but he's tough, he's gritty, and he's able to kind of come back against guys. Maybe it was Warley Alves, who kind of is an athlete, but guys who look good getting off the bus or who are like freakishly athletic but maybe don't have the toughness or the heart or the balls to stay in there when the going gets tough. And that's something I think you could definitely exploit. That's something I'm going to start looking for as well, because you do get those guys who are athletic but maybe don't have that little bit of fighter's gene. Zach Makovsky comes to mind when I think about guys like that. He's a really good athlete, really good wrestler, but, doesn't necessarily have that killer factor. Next, I asked Kelton what he thought his biggest strength was, and he said finding the value in decision props. And he gave the example of Jose Aldo over Frankie Edgar at UFC 200 and Brian Caraway over Aljamain Sterling whenever they fought. Maybe that was at Almeida versus Garbrandt. That sounds right. Let's say that's right. But Kelton's really good at this, so I recommend if you are looking to tail someone for decision props, because 48% of fights do go to decision. It's still a pretty decent prop. You could make money if you just bet every fight by decision, if you were so inclined and wanted to spread your bankroll around that way. But, if you want to find someone who's good at nailing these, he gave me 3 or 4 examples that were like plus 300 that he had hit, so definitely check him out for decision props in the future if you're looking to tail someone on that kind of prop, which is a very logical play to make. Lastly, I asked Kelton what his best advice for new MMA bettors was, and he said it was to find a style that works for you. And I couldn't agree with that more because it's very important to find something that works for you rather than trying to do what you think would work or, trying to emulate someone that you've read about or followed online because different things work for different people. Some people are really good at parlays, some people are really good at totals, some people are really good at straight picks. And while there is underlying math that ties all this stuff together, which, hint, bet the overs, the idea of finding what works for you and sticking to what you win on is important. The more you can stick to the stuff that you tend to win consistently, the more profitable you'll be as a bettor, whether or not that falls into quote unquote sharp betting or, other people's strategies. The most important thing is to win. So be sure to pick something that works for you, whatever that might be. And I think that's really good advice. Be sure to follow Kelton on YouTube, MMA Kelton. I would put the URL up there, but it's really ugly. It looked bad on the screen when I did it in the last one. So just go on there and search MMA Kelton on YouTube. You'll find him. And his Twitter is at MMA Kelton. Be sure to give him a follow there. Really sharp guy and a good dude. Fun to talk MMA with and one of the people I actually enjoy interacting with online. So be sure to follow Kelton for gambling advice and general MMA fun topics. That's going to wrap up another edition of How I Watch Fights. This is the 3026 breakdown. I am John Lee. Be sure to leave a comment, concern, questions, and I will be back with another How I Watch Fights for you very, very soon, where we're going to do a two-parter on Mike Jeans, who runs the Bet MMA Tips site, which is the best gambling site out there for data and statistics. So it's going to be awesome, and that's coming up very soon. Talk to you then.